received a tape from a listener in Idaho. He asked me what happened to tape 439, good info tape, but why make tapes in an echo box? Very disturbing to listen to. Is it possible to get a clear tape of that issue? I do apologize. I use a Panasonic. It is not the best equipment, and it's too difficult to go into KLRB and take all the material. It's easier to do the tapes with the material at my fingertips and shuffle the articles around here at home than to take it into the station at this time. The Panasonic isn't the best kind of a recorder. Up till now, I've spent thousands of dollars of my own money each year into books, magazines, articles, filing cabinets. I've never raised the price of the tapes because it's important to get the information out to you, and many of you couldn't afford it if I charged for them. I'm not making a cent on the tapes, and I'm investing $5,000 to $7,000 to $10,000 a year just on new material to get out to you so that we can share this information. That doesn't excuse a bad quality tape. If your tape is not right, if you're getting double sounds, if you're getting echoes, let me know, because it'll be weeks before you tell me, and then if there's something wrong with my machine, when I play it back, it sounds right, but if there's something wrong, I have to know. I don't want you to have a bad cassette. There's no excuse for having a bad tape. There is a problem because each one's tape machine plays a different speed, and sometimes the individual machines need cleaning. But if there's a major problem, let me know, and I may just have to invest in another type of tape machine. The racist, J.B. Stoner, was convicted this week on a very simple charge. He bombed a Baptist church in 1958 and was sentenced to 10 years in prison. He'll probably pull a Dan White and get out in 2 for good behavior. Mr. Stoner is proud of what he did. He worked with the Birmingham police and the FBI. He said that there was a plot there to just entrap him, that he worked with these people, that they knew that he did the bombings and that they paid him. And he mentioned Clarence Kelly of the FBI, who was in Birmingham, Alabama at the time. Kelly went on after his Birmingham stint to Kansas, where there is a big expose coming up of the Kansas City organized crime and mobsters. But he worked with James Hosty, the FBI agent from Dallas, Texas, involved with the killing of John Kennedy, who then went on with Clarence Kelly and was protected in Kansas City from any further investigations or exposés. Kelly then became director of the FBI after Patrick Gray was removed. Patrick Gray was covering up incidences of riots, student riots at Isla Vista, the murdering of people such as Ruben Salazar, civil rights people, black people, handling the counterintelligence investigations by shelving them and firing people who investigated them. That's another subject. I don't want to get too far off the tangent, but the FBI has been notorious in being a participant in the actual bombings and the murdering and then the covering up. But once again, you have to go back to the origins of the FBI. J. Edgar Hoover, selected by Herbert Hoover, and I'm going to get a little farther into the czarist Herbert Hoover connections, and it seems that J. Edgar Hoover's role was to suppress any chance of labor movement or the left or the civil rights coming to the front in the United States. Kelly works for the Wackenhut Corporation in Florida. It's retired FBI men. It's a private police, a Gestapo. It was set up by Claude Kirk, who became governor of Florida the same year that Ronald Reagan became governor of California. Their campaign, it was run by the same people. They met immediately after their victories. They flew and had a meeting, Kirk and Ronald Reagan, and they've been part of a national, international Nazi network, and the Gestapo group, the Wackenhut group, guards our airports and our army bases all over the United States. And Mr. Stoner's links to the FBI, to Clarence Kelly, and Kelly to Wackenhut today and Reagan are very, very strong, and it is the fabric of our society that involves the killing of John Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther King. The man who works for Mr. Stoner, his right-hand man, is the brother of James Earl Ray. Ray was charged with killing Martin Luther King. He was the fall guy or patsy selected as a front to conceal the links of the murder of Martin Luther King to the Defense Department, the FBI, the Justice Department. Ray was the fall guy, and I'm sure someday, after his 3 attempted escapes from prison, he'll have a successful one, and he'll be flown out of the country and be given a large sum of money someday. James Earl Ray's brother and Stoner are very, very close and have worked together for many years. I mentioned last week or several weeks ago that Jack Anderson had a little article. I sent you a copy that the Justice Department is sitting on information of the John Kennedy assassination, and that will be very explosive. Anderson is always a trial balloon, as I said many times. But there's a new book that came out in England this week, a very important book. I haven't read it yet. The premise is right, but the author is more interesting even than the premise. The author is Anthony Summers, who wrote File on the Tsar, and the book is called Conspiracy. And in this book, Summers alleges that Lee Harvey Oswald probably didn't fire a bullet and that Oswald was used by the intelligence community. Many of his researchers have known for years that Oswald didn't kill anybody or didn't even see or own a rifle November 22nd, 1963. But the important thing about this book is it's written by Anthony Summers, who wrote the book The File on the Tsar. And if you take that giant leap from 1919, the Russian Revolution, to Dallas, to the present day, on the brink of World War III, you begin to put the pieces of the puzzle together. The problem with finding the solution, the Kennedy assassination, doesn't rest in the Dallas Dealey Plaza era. It doesn't belong to the counterinsurgency group in 1954. It goes back to Herbert Hoover, his formation of the Tsarist groups, the Solidarists, Vaslov's army, the migration of these people into the United States and all over the world, the monarchies, to resurge and build up the resurgence of anti-communism in order for them to regain their financial investment and their throne. Now, someday I will be doing more and more, if I live long enough, on the escape of the Romanovs, the escape of Adolf Hitler, the escape of Lee Harvey Oswald, the use of doubles and subterfuge. And if you don't block out of your mind the fact that these are possibilities and you let it flow, history will come together better. There are many people that say, May, you go too far when you talk about the space alternative 3 or the planet development on Mars or about Hitler escaping. What has that got to do with now? It has everything to do with now, and Anthony Summers, as an expert on the Tsar, making the giant leap to the Kennedy story, will and does understand some of the pieces. Now, the Kennedy assassination is a part of a mess of intrigue, murder, assassinations going back to the time of the Russian Revolution. The Tsars, the White Russians, the monarchies around the world began to arm up against the Red Russians, and they epitomized them as the Antichrist and were out after them. The royal families moved to Monte Carlo, and this is very important. It became the headquarters of the Radziwills. Jackie Onassis' sister married the Count Radziwill, the displaced monarch. She married Onassis, who was making the connections of Monte Carlo to the monarchists, the Nazis in Argentine, and the Bouviers, and the royal families had their headquarters and their arms merchants in Monte Carlo, arming all over the world for this resurgence, and again, to be on the brink of the World War III where we are today. From Monte Carlo, they could move then to France, England, Spain, and all over the world, but this was the place where the royal families meet and order the weapons and make the plans for their social life as well as for the practicality of regaining those thrones. The murder of Kennedy changed the entire fabric of the United States of America, but you have to put it into its proper time slot of what was preceding it from the time of World War I up to the present day, and then understand how that assassination took place and the role of the Germans in being rearmed, of using Adolf Hitler as a man to try to take away parts of Russia or weaken Russia, and then setting up a combined Europe after World War II to make the attack against Russia one more time. January the 5th, that was tape 370, I had a triangle of power of how far we have to go to solve the assassination of John Kennedy, the original cover story being that Lee Harvey Oswald did it alone, later saying Fidel planned the murder and Fidel Castro, and then the KGB did it, and then the anti-Castro Cubans did it. That's where the House Select Committee on Assassinations left off, with Carlos Marcello and Traficanta, Santos Traficanta, the CIA and organized crime, the possibility the runaway agents from the CIA did it. But when you get to the International National Security Agency and Navy Intelligence and the Defense Industry Security Command, and Interpol and the Nazis and the Tsars, you get a better worldview from Minsk to Argentina to New Orleans and Washington, Dallas, Fort Worth area, how large this grand plan is and the interlocking role of these particular agents. But there's a lot of material coming out now and a lot of books that put pieces of the puzzle together. And for Mother's Day, I got a bunch of new books, used books, and new books from my family. That's my #1 gift now, if they want to give me a present. And I have in front of me 3 books that are important for a link to what the Anthony Summers book, The Fall on the Tsar, that link of the Tsarist to Dallas is terribly important. One of the books I got is called Monarchs in Waiting by Walter Curley. I'll give you the bibliography on the sheet that accompanies this tape. There's appendix of royal families, and among those, in the back of the book, the Russian royal family are the Sherbatovs. Well, Gally Clark, Marina Oswald's friend in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, the provider with food and clothing and cash and needs, while Oswald was in Dallas setting up headquarters, moving from Fort Worth. Gally Clark was a Sherbatov. Paul Rogatorodski, who started the Tolstoy Foundation, along with Herbert Hoover, with the Vaslovs and the Solidaris and Reinhard Galen, those people. He was with Lee and Marina Oswald and the White Russian community in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and George de Mohrenschildt, the Nazi spy whose father managed the Nobel oil fields, the Baku region, was Oswald's control agents, and Herbert Hoover, of course, had arranged for all these people and Reinhard Galen to be instrumental in coming to this country to set up an anti-communist network. The book Monarchs in Waiting is an interesting book. Another book I got is The Weapons Merchants by Bernd Engelmann. I'll give you, again on the sheet, the bibliography, and it goes into Samuel Cummings. He's from Philadelphia, the main line in Philadelphia, along with Grace Kelly, who married Prince Rainier in Monaco. In this book, The Arms Merchant to the World, describes Samuel Cummings as the largest private arms dealer in the world, and it goes into the fact that he took over and inherited the mantle of the sinister Sir Basil Zaharoff, knighted in England, of course, the arms dealer for whom the term peddler of death and devil's smiley were coined. Both men chose Monte Carlo as their place of residence, and Zaharoff provided weapons for World War I, the munitions, and was peddling weapons. And then Cummings, from the Central Intelligence Agency from Philadelphia, moved from the CIA in Washington, D.C. and Georgetown University, then to Monte Carlo and London, where he supplies the right and the left to overthrow governments and private armies. Since 1957, and of course that's an important year I cite over and over again on the tapes. This book describes the Pentagon conducting arms sales through innocuous-sounding agencies, such as the International Logistics Negotiations. They supply NATO partners, and they have ammunition companies that supply warehouses of weapons under dummy front organizations, and Cummings is part of this operation. Cummings, according to this book, owns 100,000 square feet of warehouses on the Potomac in Alexander, Virginia, where he stocked 50,000 pistols, 10,000 machine guns, 600,000 rifles, 100 million cartridges. There are 300,000 more weapons stacked in his London warehouse. He has 200 employees. Until recently, his agent in Indonesia was Prince Sukarno's cousin. And it goes into his room in Monaco, his telex communication system in London, and the CIA has been arming the entire world with these arms merchants peddling as individual persons. Actually, the Galen operation that set up our CIA has provided these people with these arms for all over the world to make war against anything that looks like a détente or rapprochement with peace, and to kill any person involved with civil rights or raising the standard of living of laborers anywhere in the world. Another book I got as a Mother's Day gift from my daughter, Hitler's Secret Life, The Mysteries of the Eagle's Nest by Glenn B. Infield. This is a new book. You can order it from Research. I'll give you the address again. I called Mr. Infield after I had read this book for about 10 hours because it links to not only to the era that Anthony Summers is working in, from the Tsar to the Kennedy assassination. This goes into Eugenio Pacelli, the nuncio in Germany, the papal nuncio, who later became Pope Pius XII, who secretly financed Hitler's rise to power. And of course, I've talked about the Vatican writing passports for the Nazis when the war was over to go to South America, and Martin Bormann taking on a Jewish name thanks to the Vatican and leaving with Jews on a boat to the Middle East and then to Argentina. But this book, it has many wonderful things I want to share with you, but there's a description in the back of the book about Hitler's departure from Germany, and I've been told stay away from the Hitler story. Don't go into the possibility that Hitler, any more than the Romanov, escapes. And in this book describes the Eagle's Nest, how Hitler was leaving soon, and Himmler went to say goodbye to him and went to the bunker. Himmler was in charge of the concentration camps, experimentations, the most brutal parts of the Nazi experiment, along with Meyer Heydrich and Martin Bormann. And Himmler goes to see Adolf Hitler while Berlin is just about to be on fire. And then he's leaving the bunker to meet with a man named Norbert Masur, M-A-S-U-R, a representative of the World Jewish Conference, and Count Folke Bernadotte, the son of the brother of the Swedish king Gustavus V. Now, Count Folke Bernadotte leaves his role in Sweden and goes to the Middle East to set up the boundaries for Israel and Palestine, and is working with Heinrich Himmler and the World Jewish Conference. Bernadotte was blown up. He was working for the United Nations, and he was blown up in Palestine, the Middle East, in 1948, at the time that he was working for the UN. He was replaced immediately by Ralph Bunche, who became head of the UN for the United States, who was later thrown out of a window. That's the way Eli Black died, the man that was in charge of United Fruit Company. I did the tapes on last week. When they began to investigate United Fruit, Eli Black was thrown out of a window. And then Dag Hammarskjöld, the head of the UN, was killed in a plane crash over the Congo when he was trying to make a rapprochement or peace in Africa. It's very unhealthy to be the head of the UN if the UN's purpose is to have peace, and all the peacemakers, whether it's John Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, or Bernadotte, and I cannot say that Bernadotte was a peacemaker. He knew too much, but he was representing the UN on these boundaries. And the importance of having books and reading many, many books, and I just can't get enough, because now that I see the network coming together, it gets more interesting. The story of Himmler working with the World Jewish Organization and Count Folke Bernadotte is fascinating, because Folke Bernadotte is described here as the brother of the Swedish king Gustavus V, the son of the brother of the Swedish king. But what it doesn't go into is that Folke Bernadotte, who set up the boundaries of Israel and Palestine and worked with Himmler, was also the great-grandson of Alexander II, the Tsar of Russia. Alexander III, the son of the Tsar, had 5 children, and one of them was Paul, and Paul had a son named Dmitri. If you get the book Nicholas and Alexandra, it has a family tree in the back of it, of the Russian family, and this is very interesting because it's got all the Tsar's family. It was put out, it's written by Robert Macy. It's a well-known book, and it comes in paperback, put out in 1967, and there's a family tree of Nicholas II, and at the end of that tree there is the son of Nicholas, Paul, who marries Alexandra, and he has a son, Dmitri. It's Dmitri who, along with his cousin Felix, murdered Rasputin for the Tsarist group. They didn't like Rasputin, but Dmitri had 2 children, and in this family tree they only show 1 child. He had a sister named Marie, who is excluded from this family tree. She's written up in other books. She had a cousin, Matilda, I can't pronounce the last name, Kaczynski. I'll give you the printed spelling of that, who wrote a book called Dancing in Petersburg. And Dmitri had a sister, and this sister was the mother of Count Folke Bernadotte from Sweden. That was his mother. In 1958, she died. Marie died. This is the granddaughter of Nicholas, the Tsar Nicholas II, and the mother of Count Folke Bernadotte, who was working with Heinrich Himmler in the bunker of Adolf Hitler, setting up the Middle East arrangements in geography after World War II with Jewish organizations. She died and is buried in Germany with her son, Count Folke Bernadotte. There are some books with family trees. For some reason, Marie was left off, but her son is in Germany, buried in Germany, and he was working with the United Nations and So that the United Nations after World War II was set up with members of the Tsar's family, the great-grandson of the Tsar, the peacemaker, who again, the same entourage after the Russian Revolution that were dividing Germany and getting ready for a war against Russia, were doing it after World War II and getting ready again for one more world war against the Soviet Union. This book describes Hitler talking with Goebbels about a final broadcast that Goebbels was to make as the bombs were outside the bunker. He was coherent, he was calm, he was complete control of himself. This story that Hitler was a babbling idiot doesn't seem to be true, and I called the author of this book. His name is Glenn Infield. He lives in Pennsylvania. I talked to him about Hitler and the information that I have about where Hitler left, because this book clearly implies that Hitler made detailed plans to leave and did leave and went down to Argentina as my plans. This is what I was told and from my various research about the matter. And so I called him to share some information, and Mr. Infield said he's now writing a book on Reinhard Gehlen, the Gehlen operation, and he wasn't aware that Reinhard Gehlen's agents were involved with the killing of John Kennedy, or that Marina Oswald was an agent of Reinhard Gehlen. He's writing a book on the influence of Gehlen on our American political system, and didn't realize the chain of command of Gehlen to the Dallas assassination and the conspiracy that took place November 22nd, 1963. Mr. Infield asked me why would Gehlen's agents be involved in the murder of John Kennedy in the United States in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and I told him to look up in his library the New York Times, Saturday, November 23rd, 1963, and there's a picture of Lee Harvey Oswald, and across the whole front of the paper it says, "Leftist charged with murder in the assassination of Kennedy and policeman's death." And because the leftists could be charged in this case, or the loner in the case of James Earl Ray with Martin Luther King, or Sirhan, the subterfuge was that same old Reichstag story about the leftists bombing the German buildings and therefore having to crack down on the leftists in Germany. The whole role of Lee and Marina Oswald, Lee bringing Marina back, Marina being a Tsarist white Russian princess, either related to George de Mohrenschildt or the Serbatovs. We don't know her background. Her father's name is completely unknown. She will not reveal it. Nobody to this day knows the name of Marina Oswald's father, and I have reason to believe, because of the way she was treated in the United States in the Dallas-Fort Worth area by these very wealthy, prominent, noble families, that she's either related to George de Mohrenschildt, George Bowie, Paul Rogatorodski, or Gally Clark, one of the Sherbatovs, that Marina comes originally from an aristocratic white Russian family, part of that Tsarist network, and that her usefulness as the primary witness before the investigation of the assassination of John Kennedy was to project Lee Harvey Oswald as a loner, no-do-well, a guy who fumbled with his right hand and his left hand, and concealed the links of the Tsarist, white Russian, Nazi, United States intelligence operation to the continuous overthrow of countries all over the world, as well as in Dallas. When I got out my headlines, copies of headlines to look at and referred to, for Mr. Infield, the comment that the leftists killed the President of the United States, I came across a newspaper headline, the New York Times, Saturday, September 28, 1963. That was 3 months before John Kennedy was killed. In its article where Valachi of organized crime is naming the bosses of the syndicate in that, that's 3 months before Mr. Gambino, Carlos Gambino, John Rosselli, Sam Giancana, and the whole gang were involved in the Kennedy assassination. There's an article about Vito Genovese in here, and his six-figure income and his money and how he was friendly with Mussolini. This goes back to September 1963, organized crime figure, and how close he was at the end of World War II with Mussolini. And Genovese later was linked directly to Jack Ruby, an Army military man in the Dallas-Fort Worth area at the time of the assassination. So while the Valachi information on organized crime was breaking in the news just months before Kennedy was killed, the very crime figures that were being exposed were working with the Defense Department to kill John Kennedy 3 months later. this history of the Tsars' families, of Count von Bernadotte, of Himmler and Adolf Hitler is fascinating, and I have many good books and articles that I'm reading to put these pieces together. Many people say, you're doing this research for so long, what is the bottom line? Why don't you sit and write a book? And the answer is that I don't feel I'm really ready. Right now, the pieces are coming. I'm working again all summer on a book that I began last summer, and I'll be putting it together this summer. The research is completed. But the pieces of the interlocking links of the countries and the various persons involved are becoming more clear now, thanks to many, many books that are coming out, and also to my new awareness about the old books. There was something that I didn't have yet, which I'm getting, and I'm accumulating a lot of old books as well as new books and putting them together. For example, I don't know why the book on the Romanovs pardon me, leaves out one daughter, an important daughter, whose son then becomes the instrument of the Middle East and the Nazis and the Jewish Front Organization. Why her name is left out of that family tree, I don't know. It's mentioned in other books, but that would be a good question to solve in terms of putting the history pieces of the puzzle together. How one person whose son, von Bernadotte, is so important to the post-war era, how her name isn't even in the family tree when her brother is there, and she's buried with her son, von Bernadotte, in Germany at the present time. Now, on this tape, if I still have time, is a shocker for all of you who have done research. It's one of the most disgusting articles I've read, and that tops them all. It has to do with the new bills to hide information that the CIA and the FBI have. It's called Measures to Shield U.S. Data is Criticized. We all know there's a controversy on how much the FBI should tell us and how much the CIA is going to tell us and how much is going to be locked up that we can't get from freedom of information. The article says, and I'm going to quote just two paragraphs. If I don't finish it on this side of the tape, I'll start it on the other. The FBI is now required to disclose a wide range of information under the Freedom of Information Act. It is required to give out information about the Rosenberg spy case, the assassination of President Kennedy, the surveillance of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. At the same time, the Bureau may refuse information that would interfere with a pending investigation or constitute an unwarranted invasion of personal privacy or disclose the identity of confidential sources. But there's two proposed bills that would keep this information secret. One, proposed by Senator Orrin Hatch, which isn't anything new. He's from Utah, and he wants to say the FBI should keep their record secret for 10 years after the termination of any investigation or prosecution. Once you've been prosecuted or been investigated and cleared, lock it up for 10 years. But here's the worst part. Senator Edward Kennedy, Democrat of Massachusetts, supported by the Carter administration, would permit the FBI Bureau to destroy all its criminal investigation records 10 years after the termination of an investigation or prosecution. Senator Ted Kennedy wants it destroyed. Orrin Hatch says keep it 10 years. But Ted Kennedy says after something has been investigated, 10 years. John Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther King, Chappaquiddick, what's he talking about? George Wallace, with Artie Bremer locked up in prison in Maryland. Ted Kennedy wants the assassination information destroyed, the information that killed John Kennedy and Robert Kennedy. He wants that destroyed after 10 years. That's what I read in the New York Times. And if you get any hint of my anger or disgust, I'll do a little more on the other side of this tape. It's enough to make you puke. Now, Bruce Roberts wrote a book or a manuscript which he gave to me, the Gemstone File. I have the entire complete, what was the Gemstone File that he put together, of the links of Senator Ted Kennedy to Aristotle Onassis and Jackie Onassis in Monte Carlo. Is that true? Is he concealing for them and wealth and power who murdered his brother? Is he working that close with Jackie Onassis? I'm not going to answer that one. I'm asking the question. Think it over. We'll put some more on the other side of the tape. The meaning of Senator Kennedy wanting this material destroyed. is Mae Brussell. On tape 441 is May the 16th, 1980, and it's side 2 of the tape. I might expect that Orrin Hatch, the extreme conservative from Utah, would want the FBI record secret for 10 years, but even he didn't suggest the destruction of this information. It's Ted Kennedy, again, the son of a known Nazi sympathizer, Joe Kennedy, who's asking to protect the links of the Tsars and the Nazis to the actual murdering of his own 2 or possibly 3 brothers. And as investigations go on, as Jack Anderson hints about the opening up of the Kennedy assassination and a new book coming out by Summers and many, many others, we can expect another surge of murders of primary witnesses. We don't know who will be next or where, but you have to keep your eyes open as they fall by the wayside. I received a letter last week from a gentleman in Chicago, Illinois, that has to do with this subject, not knowing whether I myself will be the victim or whether it will be another witness to the Kennedy assassination, but I want to share it with you now. It goes back to tape 399 in July of 1979, a year ago. Can't believe the time goes that fast. We're almost moving into July again. I did a tape about Lee Harvey Oswald and a possible double by the name of Crawford, Curtis Laverne Crawford, who worked for Jack Ruby. And in that tape I went into detail about his working for carnivals and traveling circuses, his role in the Defense Department, and I won't repeat what is on that tape. You can order it. It's tape number 399. And I mentioned circuses that he belonged to in California. One was the Royal West Golden Gate Carnival. The other was the Jerry Lepke Carnival. Another one was the Michigan Kittyland Carnival. And I felt that they were a front for the Defense Intelligence Agency, a meeting place, and that this Curtis Laverne Crawford went to work at Jack Ruby's nightclub 3 weeks before Ruby killed Lee Harvey Oswald, cutting off the connections again to the Tsarist Nazi links to the assassination. And members of the Warren Commission were concerned that Larry Crawford was a double of Lee Harvey Oswald that had been in a taxi cab driven by William Whaley, who then was killed shortly thereafter. And I did a tape on the circus connections and the military German connections to the Kennedy assassination. Several months ago, I got a letter from a gentleman in Chicago, stationary from the Internation Circus Studios, and I had reason to believe it was a front organization for the CIA. I don't know the format of the letter, and he ordered 8 tapes that I sent to him. And an employee of his wrote to me last week and told me that this particular gentleman who has the circus operation in Illinois, which was a headquarters of E. Howard Hunt and G. Gordon Liddy and the White House Plumbers and Charlie Bates, who then went on to head up the counterintelligence, the SLA group in San Francisco, the Chicago, Illinois headquarters, is very much involved in aspects of the assassination of John Kennedy. And an employee from that circus outfit wrote to me that he had my name in their files and that the man that he works for under the guise of a circus operation is set up by the CIA, that they schedule circus acts, and that their group, the Internation, is part of the security and ID division of the intelligence system of the government. That's what I was talking about on that tape, and this man had ordered a set of tapes from me, and when I looked up the numbers, he had in fact ordered the tape, naming the circus companies that Larry Crawford worked for. The letter I received last week told me that G. Gordon Liddy had been in that office a month ago, as had Mitchell Werbel. Werbel works with Samuel Cummings, the arms merchant of the world. He supplies the silencers for the assassinations, the assassination teams. That Kirkola, who was arrested in December and has not been prosecuted, he was arrested in New York City, was heading assassination teams and works with Cummings, the arms merchant from Monte Carlo in Great Britain and the United States. Werbel works with this gang. There's a network here of people that I've been talking about on various tapes and interlocking to the conspiracies and the royalists and the network of assassinations coming down. The letter I got from an employee of this Internation Circus told me that Mitchell Werbel was in the offices there and G. Gordon Liddy was there. I showed it to a retired member of the FBI and suggested that he suggested that I send this information on to the FBI in Washington and also local FBI. When you get hit teams like G. Gordon Liddy and Mitchell Werbel and these fronts combining together, it's hard to know whether they're going to hit the person who's exposing it, such as myself, or whether they're going to bump off Larry Crawford, Curtis Laverne Crawford, because he's a very important part of his relationship to Jack Ruby and the Defense Department and the killing of Oswald to hide the links that I've been talking about for the past half hour. He also corresponded with a fellow researcher in Texas and enclosed a copy of his letter, their correspondence with each other. And how he knew that we knew each other, I don't know. So obviously my mail is opened or the line is tapped or both, because he's sending me copies of correspondence from somebody that I know elsewhere, and there'd be no way that he would know that I know this person. So we have this Chicago, Illinois circus front that works with the CIA and the Defense Department, the National Security Agency, a man that's been involved with assassination teams and hit squads, and my name was in his files. I got a letter saying I got your name from his files and had a chance to listen to one of the tapes you sent. So the man writing to me didn't order the tapes. The man that I was talking about ordered the tapes, and they're in the files back there in Chicago, Illinois. And as I say, he also has contacts with G. Gordon Liddy and Frank Sturgis and Mitchell Werbel. That's an unhealthy team no matter where they travel. So Liddy isn't far out of the killing business that he is very proud to be doing and was doing before Watergate, and certainly will be useful after Watergate now that he's out of jail, and brags about his strength. He's like Mr. Stoner. He's proud of what he does, and he's still meeting with the killing teams. If you don't have tape 399, July 27th, 1927, I suggest you get it. It's a terribly important tape. I think all of them are, but this is very important because as the investigation opens up, a next layer of people have to be murdered, and I'm sure that Curtis Laverne Crawford would be first on the list if he isn't dead already. Speaking of death, did you read that John Bennett was the victim of a plane crash this week, the same week that Richard Nixon was on television with Barbara Walter acting every bit the international statesman? The man in charge of his White House tapes was killed. He was in a plane wreck over Anchorage, Alaska, almost the same place where they dumped Hale Boggs of the Warren Commission, who was killed just at the time the Watergate story broke. And of course, Hale Boggs could take Watergate right back to Dallas. Mr. Bennett was in charge of the secret tapes that Richard Nixon made. He was cognizant of all the White House tapes. They were entrusted to him. He testified before John Sirica that Rosemary Woods, Nixon's secretary, told him that the gap existed, but under questioning he couldn't say, even though he was responsible for the tapes, which one of the tapes was taken out, who had access to them, or how they were secured. He graduated from West Point Military Academy, had a master's degree at George Washington and Columbia University. Columbia, of course, is the university where General Eisenhower became president after World War II. Before he became president of the United States, he was president of Columbia University, where Brzezinski was brought in, who, again, is leading us to World War III. Brzezinski on the faculty of Columbia University, and John Bennett attending Columbia with General Eisenhower. You see how these interesting pieces come together. Harvard and Columbia, very important in these assassination cover-ups and the instigation of preparing us for World War III. Well, this fellow's last assignment was at Fort Carson, Colorado, and he was just happening to fly over Anchorage, Alaska, and his body was located, his plane was found. One newspaper article said, Watergate figure's body found in plane wreckage. But he was more than a Watergate figure. He held the key for President Nixon, for General Alexander Haig, who became assistant to the President of the United States from the Pentagon. He was able to erase, again, any discussion or links or threads going back to the Kennedy murder. The White House tapes refer to the Bay of Pigs thing, but all of these agents and operatives were murdered and were involved in murder and the overthrow of other countries as well as the United States. E. Howard Hunt filed a $3 million suit, $3.5 million suit against Victor Marchetti, who said that Hunt was involved in the assassination of President Kennedy. He's also suing Liberty Lobby for publishing his role in the involvement of Kennedy. There's a three-part series on listener-sponsored radio TV this past Friday and the next 2 weeks on the Central Intelligence Agency, and the one last week was very good with Philip Agee. I hope you are watching these series once a week. It's a three-part series, and it tells how the assassination teams in the Central Intelligence Agency murder heads of states, and it talks a little bit about Patrice Lumumba and others. And men like E. Howard Hunt or Alan Dulles don't say, I want you to kill so-and-so, and here's a slip of paper, kill John Kennedy on this day when he's in Dallas. They do by word of mouth agreements out on boats, golf courses, out in places where rooms aren't bugged. There's no written piece of paper, but they give it to members of organized crime, and then this crime syndicate does the murder. And the question came out in the television show, isn't that dangerous? Aren't you open to blackmail when the organized crime does the killings for you? And the answer, of course, is yes. And again, I repeat what I say often, over and over, the world is run by bullets and blackmail. And then they go into a crime figure from Corsica and from Marseille who was offered $25,000 for a job and turned it down because it was small money, and he makes enough dealing heroin, and he's part of the assassination squad that works with the Central Intelligence Agency. A very good show on the process of how they murder and the way they cover it up, so that E. Howard Hunt can, say, produce a document, Mr. Marchetti, to show I was involved in the Kennedy assassination, but in getting documents back and forth for a $3.5 million lawsuit, Victor Marchetti can respond by getting more information, and so the exposure will go on and on. When James McCord threatened to sue me because I made the same allegations that he was involved in Dallas in the Kennedy assassination, I went on the air at the time and said, great, bring him on, bring the evidence out into court, and it's in court where it was stopped and the suit never came about, because in the process of discovery you can ask for other information, and I'm just sure that E. Howard Hunt wouldn't have a leg to stand on just on circumstantial evidence alone of Central South America and his role with the plumbers and various murders before and after, including J. Edgar Hoover or Chappaquiddick. You can compile a pretty good case that he had a finger in the John Kennedy murder. So it'll be interesting to see how that progresses. The great Michael Sindona from the Vatican, the man who I described in tapes a few weeks ago threatening to make links of the Central Intelligence Agency and organized crime to the Vatican. I did a tape on the blackmail threats of Sindona. He cut his wrist while a guard was watching him in jail, or was his wrist being cut while Sindona was watching? He was supposed to be sentenced the next day. He might have made an interesting speech. We'll see what happens to Sindona if or when he pulls out of this one. But the guard was right there at the time. You remember how when G. Gordon Liddy was selling his book a few weeks ago and pumping it around the country, he was saying how he had ordered plans to kill E. Howard Hunt while he was in jail, that he knew people in jail, whether guards or prison chiefs or whatever, and from the cell in jail, you order somebody from crime or otherwise or in food to poison, that he has a facility as part of the intelligence, the Treasury Department, from alcohol, tobacco, firearms, Defense Department, FBI, and CIA. G. Gordon Liddy held all those offices, and he had the capability of ordering the murder of people while still a man in prison himself. So this banker, Michelle Sedona, the link to the Gambino family, organized crime, Chase Manhattan, the multinationals, Carlos Paul Masinkas, the treasurer of the Vatican from Chicago, Illinois again. He had his wrist slashed. He's the man who faked his kidnapping last year while he went to Europe to try to get out of his trial, and now he is in a hospital attended to while a guard allegedly was standing right there when the blood was gushing. Dr. Bodden, the controversial doctor who worked with the House Select Committee on Assassinations, worked with the CIA, the chief coroner who was removed from New York City as the chief medical examiner, has been reinstated. He was removed from that office as chief coroner, and he appealed the case, and he's been put back as chief medical examiner. He works with the government, covered up the House Select Committee investigation of the real autopsy of John Kennedy. He's the man who was on the telephone out in San Diego, California, when Nelson Rockefeller was murdered, who telephonically told Dr. Eshikoff, a member of the Broder band from South Africa who worked his way into the medical system of New York City, to go ahead and cremate Nelson Rockefeller. They cremated him on Sunday instead of waiting till the services on Monday. It was telephonically. The permission was given. That was Dr. Michael Baden, and he's been reinstated. The New York Times had a description of the office of Chief Medical Examiner, how honorable it was for so many decades that Dr. Milton Halpern was Chief Medical Examiner for 20 years and gave the office a reputation for independence and integrity. Dr. Milton Halpern wrote a book about the autopsy of John Kennedy. He wrote a book about autopsies and violent death, and he criticized the military and the doctors who did this terrible autopsy on John Kennedy and just about refused to acknowledge that there was any medical basis for their conclusions, and implied, of course, that the whole job was botched and covered up. And at the time the House Select Committee was doing their picking of staff and beginning to open up the investigation of John Kennedy, Dr. Halpern died in San Diego, California on a visit. Milton Halpern died. I've done tapes on his untimely death just at that time. And Dr. Michael Baden was selected by Mr. Blakey and the CIA to cover up the direction of the shots and how many there were. And it is the importance of the autopsy that fits in with books like Anthony Summers when he writes that Oswald didn't fire a rifle, because when the ballistic direction and the trajectory comes different from where Lee Harvey Oswald was standing, then it shows up in the autopsy, and that's why you need people like Dr. Michael Baden. The New York Times had an article referring to when Baden was fired in New York City, and Dr. Farrar, he's the city health commissioner, wrote a report. Farrar wrote, this is in quote from the New York Times, Dr. Baden has spoken at a conference at Lenox Hill Hospital and presented details not previously presented in such a fashion to indicate that Governor Nelson Rockefeller died during sexual intercourse. Now, this was the claim, one of the reasons they wanted to get rid of Baden. He was so quick to give a cause of death of Nelson Rockefeller. But Baden was just being a good team member. Nelson Rockefeller was murdered so that they could make way for Ronald Reagan to capture California to New York, and for Mr. Casey from the Galen Eastern Nazi operation to manage Reagan's campaign. And Rockefeller was gotten away with long before the primaries were to come about, and Ronald Reagan is the candidate for the Republicans. It took a lot of murders, a lot of deaths to get him into that position, and a lot of coroners lying. And of course, Baden is a man who was not even in the city when Rockefeller died. He was out in California, and Rockefeller was quickly cremated so that any trace of poison or injection in his arm or needles would never be revealed. Ronald Reagan's California team and the South African team and the intelligence, defense, Pentagon network made sure that even Nelson Rockefeller, as evil and lousy as he is, had to be removed. I understand that Rockefeller was publicly fighting with David Rockefeller on many issues, and that there was a big controversy going on at the time that Nelson Rockefeller died. And of course, there's another brother, another family, sitting tight and covering up the murder, just as Ted Kennedy is doing with his brother's assassinations. Another shocking story in the newspaper this week is that Neil Welch, the FBI man in charge of the Abscam investigations, is leaving the FBI. He is now going to Kentucky, an area which is being investigated for wrongdoing in state government. Neil Welch lived in Philadelphia. He's the man who knew the Cummings, Kelly, mainline mafia, Angelo Bruno connections to organized crime. He left Philadelphia and went to New York and said it is a cesspool, I've used that quotation before, a cesspool of crime and corruption. The New Jersey casinos, the Philadelphia connections, and he set up the Abscam operation, and before there's a single arrest or a trial, and they're about to set up some kind of arrest on the Abscam case, the very man who was responsible for getting this going for 2 years, of breaking open a peek into the Philadelphia casino, New Jersey connections, which then go linked to London and Monte Carlo and Virginia and the CIA in Washington. This man has been removed. He is supposed to retire mandatory at 55 years of age, so they said, well, he's just 53, so he may as well look for another job, and they've taken him to Kentucky to work in the correction department with the Crime Commission. So the very man that set up the entire Abscam operation with the links of the federal government to congressmen in the pay of organized crime, gambling, casinos, assassination squads that go back to the Kennedy murders and to the future murders that are well orchestrated by the crime figures along with the intelligence community. Mr. Welch was removed from the FBI before he could conclude the prosecution of the work that he's done for the past 2 years. Speaking of death, Senator Cranston's son was knocked over by a person. A car hit him. They identified the person who did it. The man isn't being held. The son had multiple surgery. He's on the brink of death. Senator Cranston is running against Mr. Gann, the Jarvis-Gann amendment here, a known political, very conservative person in California, and he's with his son night and day at the bedside. They don't know if he'll live or not. The new Secretary of State, Edmund Muskie's daughter, is under protection of the FBI, 24-hour protection. She's going to the University of Maine, and she's received death threats to the dormitory that she's going to be killed. There are threats by various people, and the FBI is guarding her now, and she's being protected. There's a possibility that if her father makes a rapprochement or peace, she will be murdered. The call is from Iranians, probably from the Savak in the United States, not wanting her father to go to the Soviet Union or to get along with the regime that is presently in power in Iran. Speaking of abscam and Nazi collections, art collections, there was an article in the paper this last week you might not have seen. French prince jailed as the third man suspect in a bungled art burglary. Prince Thibaut d'Orléans, the son of the pretender of the French throne, the highest-ranking royal member of the family to be charged with a crime since King Louis XV and Marie Antoinette were charged with treason. The prince has been caught taking artworks, valuable art treasures, from the airport in Paris, and he was about to fly to Latin America with oil paintings and statues. This is the son of the Count of Paris, one of Paris's richest men, a fortune estimated at $400 million. The son was boarding a flight at Orly Airport April 26th and going to South America. He had masterminded taking art treasures from the Pyrenees. I just wonder what art treasures he had and if any of these originally went back to some that the Nazis had collected. An interesting multi-millionaire caught at an airport with paintings that were to be delivered to South America. A lot of people were suspicious of the possibility of abscam arrests or what a few people were trying to do in the way of an investigation, but the result of having the organized crime take over the cities hasn't even been completely felt enough for American people to want to call a halt. There's an article this last week, Associated Press, the mafia thrives in 20 U.S. cities. Now, one reason they thrive is that they have been the hitmen for the assassination teams, for the royalists, the czarists, the United States government, Navy intelligence, Army, and so forth, and in exchange they got immunity from prosecution, and that's how they learned to thrive. This recent article says the mafia thrives in 20 metropolitan areas, including San Francisco and San Jose. There are at least 20,000 criminals at large, participants in criminal enterprises as part of the Mafia, La Cosa Nostra, and there was testimony before the Senate Permanent Investigation Subcommittee. The 5 New York City families, plus 1 in Chicago, Philadelphia, Detroit, and Buffalo, New York, are powerful. Besides San Francisco and San Jose, there's the Boston Providence, that's the Irish Mafia, the Catholic Irish Mafia of Boston that has been fighting the Italian Jewish Mafia in Vegas and trying to take control of the casino in New Jersey. The Elizabeth Newark, New Jersey group, the Pittsburgh, Tustin, Scranton, Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania group, Cleveland, St. Louis, Tampa, Florida, New Orleans, Rockford, Illinois, Milwaukee, Madison, Wisconsin, Kansas City, that's the Kelly Hosty area, Denver, Pueblo, Colorado, the military connections to the cocaine connections, Tucson, Arizona, and Los Angeles. Miami and Vegas are open cities free to operate. There are 109 Cosa Nostra members from 16 families operating at least part-time in Miami. And how did the Miami Mafia get their strength? Through Carlos Marcello, Santos Traficanta, Meyer Lansky, and their work with Robert Mayu from the Central Intelligence, the FBI, and working at the docks and working in Italy, Vito Genovese and that group after World War II and after World War I, the Italian Mafia, but particularly useful in the effort to take the Soviet Union, to kill labor organizers, to kill the left, to kill anti-war protesters, politicians, witnesses to trials. They've been used for all of this, and therefore they have immunity from prosecution, huge payoffs, blackmail, extortion, and until they begin to talk, the case will hold together. But they have a bond that holds them together as loyalists, and so they have to be continuously paid off by the power structure. That's how they get their muscle. There's another article about the hearings in Washington, the subcommittee. It talks about warring gangsters terrorize Florida. South Florida alone has a $7 billion illegal drug traffic, 150 drug-related executions over the past 2 years. Now, out of the 150 there, I know of 10 or 12 that were directly involved to the assassination team. So in between the drug traffic crimes, you get the witnesses to these trials. As a matter of fact, when G. Gordon Liddy was talking about how he sets up assassination teams and kills people, or whether they were going to kill Jack Anderson or whoever they had selected as their target, the possibility is, should we have somebody mug them in Washington and make it look like a drug fix or a hit-and-run person that's on narcotics? It's a very convenient way of setting up a murder or assassination and then saying that death is the result of a gang or a drug war or drug-related, rather than that they were important witnesses to a trial or they were a thorn in our side. There's another report this week. Politics may have stopped the Temple probe, the killing of Leo Ryan, the Use Ryan bill. He wanted to put brakes on the power of the Central Intelligence Agency. He was sent down to that Jim Jones, the gun-running thief with his millions of dollars of international money in Panama, Switzerland, and so forth. Leo Ryan was killed. And there's an article, an investigation going on in Sacramento that children could have been saved. At least 22 children were from welfare homes that were given to Jim Jones. That he was the guardian of these children, and that there were complaints to investigate Jim Jones and the safety of these children, that they were being beat, that they were getting ostracism, their hair was shaved, they were getting hard punishment, physical and mental abuse, infringement of their personal liberties. And then the investigation goes on to say that one reason they couldn't go into Jonestown was because of the links of Jim Jones to Rosalind Carter, Lieutenant Governor Merv Dimely, who's also been linked to organized crime, and various people in California politics, George Moscone, and so forth. Jim Jones was so much part of the American milieu and the political system that he couldn't be investigated, and 923 people had to die because the political system is involved with gun running, narcotics, brain and physical experimentation, and they're sacrificing old people, black people, children, and hushing up the investigation because crime has the upper figure, and if they need a Port Khartoumi next to Venezuela, and they need places for experimentation and operations for gun running and drug trafficking, the people are the front, and the politicians have allowed it to happen. The music I played on the tape this week, and I'll close with a little bit of it, is from Anthony Newley's play, Stop the World, I Want to Get Off. When you read some of this, you ought to say, Stop the World, I Want to Puke. But this is the way it is. These are the interweavings of the mayor of San Francisco, the president of the United States, his wife, and they're linked to narcotic operators. There's an article this week about the grand jury in Washington opening up again Jimmy Carter's Georgia connections to Robert Vesco, involved with gun running, narcotics, swindling, organized crime, how Jimmy Carter is having the Justice Department hit and silence his links to that can of worms. I only have about 300 important articles to share with you, spread out here trying to decide each week what is the most important, but I think this is enough information for you to absorb and think about until we get together next week. The overall smell of death, the vultures hanging over us, the arms merchants, the plans for World War III, the weapons, the waste, the destruction, the experimentation, the pain, the killing, comes from maybe 10% of the population that control 80% of the Earth's population, that are allowing starvation and killing in Cambodia now, in Ethiopia, all over the world. These people have absolutely become heartless in their greed, in their insensibility, their insanity, and it's only through understanding how they got there that we'll ever be able to remove them and spit on their graves. So our purpose here is simply to study history, study it thoroughly, put the pieces together, if you can stomach the nausea of these people. And I find it interesting to be able at least to see their interlocking links, as foul as they are, and to feel that I'm at least in control of my own mind to figure some of this out. Our space has run out on this tape, so I'll say goodbye to next week, and I'll be back with you next week.